I just accepted a remote job with a small company, and everything seemed fine at first. But shortly after I accepted the job, a strange request came up. They asked me to travel to one of the owner's homes for training. No contract, no official paperwork, just an invitation to a place I didn't know. At first I thought I might be overthinking it, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like something wasn't right. After searching for a job for a long time, I finally received an offer from a small company that specializes in remote services. The interview process went smoothly, and I went through 2 rounds of Zoom interviews with the company's owners. They were professional, friendly, and spoke about the company with clear passion. I felt fairly confident and excited about this opportunity, especially since they mentioned it was a completely remote job, which was exactly what I was looking for. After the final interview, they sent me a job offer via email. I reviewed the email and decided to accept the position, hoping it would be a great opportunity for my career. However, there was one thing that made me a bit uneasy. There were no official documents or paperwork required. I had been expecting a formal employment contract, a detailed job description, or at least a formal notification of the terms and conditions, but nothing was sent. They didn't even ask for basic personal information like my full name, date of birth, or health insurance details, which I thought was essential when starting a job. I thought maybe it was just because the company was small and didn't have the resources to prepare all the administrative paperwork right away. Perhaps they would send these documents after I started. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started to think more about it, especially when I noticed something else unusual. Throughout the interview process, the owners repeatedly emphasized that this job was completely remote. They assured me there would be no travel or in-person training, just work via online tools. But right after I accepted the job, something strange happened. They asked me to travel to one of the owner's homes for training. Even though the company was supposed to be fully remote and all interactions during the interview process had been via Zoom, they now wanted me to travel an hour and a half to attend an in-person training session at one of the founders' homes. It struck me as odd, and I couldn't understand why this was necessary. Why couldn't the training be conducted online, as they had initially promised? As I thought more about it, the unease began to grow. The more I reflected, the more strange and unsettling it seemed. I realized that I still didn't really know much about them other than the online meetings. I had no idea where they lived or anything about the company, aside from what was shared during the interviews. This made me start to doubt the legitimacy of the company. I couldn't even find any public records about them beyond what was listed on the company website. There were no reviews or feedback from previous employees or clients. I tried to push the worries aside, but the sense of unease kept growing. After all, it seemed strange that a company operating entirely remotely would require me to go to a stranger's house for training. After receiving the request to go to one of the owner's homes for training, I started to feel that I could no longer ignore the strange signs. Although I really wanted this job, the unease was growing stronger. I sat in my room, looking at the email I had just received and thinking about the odd request. In reality, I had never met any of the owners outside of Zoom, and now I was being asked to go to a place I had never been before. I started to wonder why they couldn't hold the training online, as they had mentioned during the interview process. Even though the company was small, I thought they could easily use online tools for training. On the other hand, asking me to go to an unfamiliar and private location made me feel uncomfortable. Why couldn't they choose a public space, like a cafe, or even rent an office? It seemed like this company wasn't interested in transparency, and that made me feel uneasy. After a few days of thinking it over, I decided to address it directly with them. I replied to the email expressing my concerns about going to their house. I explained that while I was very excited about the job, I didn't feel comfortable meeting at someone's private home without any clear reason for this arrangement. I asked if it would be possible to either conduct the training online or meet at a public location where I could feel safer. A few hours later, I received a response. Their answer surprised me and made me feel even more concerned. They said that, for their company, training could only take place at one of the owner's homes and that they couldn't organize the session anywhere else. They explained that the sole reason for this request was to ensure confidentiality and privacy during the training, even though this hadn't been mentioned at any point during the interview. I felt a wave of unease wash over me, especially when they said I couldn't bring anyone with me. This only made me feel more unsafe. There was no reasonable explanation for why they wanted me to meet them at a private, non-public location. I thought if this was truly a professional and transparent company, they wouldn't ask a new employee to come to their private home without any assurances about safety or legal procedures. At this point, I started to wonder if I was facing a potentially dangerous situation. I wanted to take this job, but the fear kept making it hard to ignore these odd red flags. Everything was becoming more complicated, and I began to feel like I had entered a situation that I couldn't control. After receiving their response, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Their explanation about keeping confidentiality and security only made me feel more uneasy. Yes, I understood that security is important, but asking a new candidate to go to one of the owner's homes, whom I knew nothing about beyond a few Zoom conversations, just didn't make sense. It felt like I was being pulled into a situation I couldn't control. At this point, I started to wonder if this was a sign that the job might not be legitimate. Doubts began flooding my mind, and I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. A truly professional company wouldn't ask a new employee who hadn't even signed a contract yet to visit their private home without any guarantees about safety. I felt like I was being lured into a trap. I couldn't just sit back and wait any longer, so I decided to share the situation with my family and friends. I told my mom, who has always been my go-to person when things get tough. She listened quietly for a moment before saying, "Honey, this isn't right. If they were a legitimate company, they wouldn't ask you to come to their house with no commitment." My mom emphasized that my feelings of unease were completely valid, and I needed to think carefully before proceeding with anything. I also called a close friend, someone who had worked in recruitment. She listened to my story and agreed that it all sounded very odd. If they really want a safe and professional work environment, they wouldn't ask you to go to their private home like that. This could be a sign of an unreliable company, she said. After these conversations with my family and friends, I felt like I could no longer ignore the doubts in my mind. I decided to write another email to them, asking for clarification on the issue. I explained that while I was eager to work for the company, my safety had to be a top priority. I requested they provide more information on why meeting at their home was mandatory and why I couldn't participate in the training remotely or meet in a public space. As I hit send on the email, a wave of anxiety washed over me. I wasn't sure how they would respond, but I knew I couldn't continue with a job without clear answers. I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity, but my safety and comfort had to come first. Regardless of the outcome, I had prepared myself to decline if they didn't meet my requests. A few hours after I sent my email requesting clarification, I received a response from them. I opened the email and began reading, my heart racing as I noticed their tone. They replied that the training could only take place at one of the owner's homes, and there was no way to change that. Honestly, I had expected a more reasonable explanation, but instead, they only repeated the same reason about security and privacy. What surprised me the most was that after explaining the sole reason for this request being information security, they pointed out something else important. In the email, they emphasized that I could not bring anyone with me, and they would not accept any changes to the plan. At this point, I was not only anxious, but also feeling a mix of confusion and anger. How could a company ask me to go to such a place without any assurances about my safety? After reading the email, I felt even more suspicious of this company. If they truly intended to build a professional work environment, they wouldn't ask a new candidate to do something I wasn't comfortable with. And the way they responded when I expressed my concerns wasn't how a professional company would act. They didn't listen to me at all. Instead, they insisted that I follow their demands, or they would rethink my candidacy. One thing that bothered me even more was when they said they only wanted collaborative and like-minded employees. This statement felt like a warning that they wouldn't tolerate any opposition or questions from their staff. It made me feel like they were using their authority to coerce me into doing something I wasn't willing to do. With all these thoughts in my mind, I decided that I couldn't continue with this company. While I really wanted a stable job and the opportunity to grow, I couldn't sacrifice my safety and comfort. I prepared a response email in which I directly declined the job offer, expressing my disappointment with how the situation had been handled. As I hit send on the rejection email, I felt an odd sense of relief, but I couldn't shake the worry about what might happen next. Would they understand why I declined? How would they react? Part of me was ready to face any confrontation, but the other part felt a wave of relief, knowing I had made the right decision. After sending the rejection email, I felt a sense of relief for making the right decision, but I couldn't help but worry about what might happen next. Everything I knew about this company had been exposed in a few short days, and I didn't want to find myself in a dangerous situation or face risks I couldn't control. However, I couldn't stop thinking about whether I had missed out on a great opportunity. This job had been offered with promises of freedom and flexibility, things I had truly been hoping for. But the feeling of unease continued to linger. I couldn't forget the feeling I had when reading the lines in their email where they said they would rethink me as a candidate just because I expressed concern for my safety. This only reinforced that this company might not be where I wanted to work. The way they handled the situation made it clear they didn't care about the comfort or safety of their employees. I then decided to report the situation. Although I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, I felt it was important to share my experience. I went back to the job listing on the recruitment site where I had applied initially and started drafting a brief report about what had happened. I didn't want to harm anyone, but I thought it was important to warn others. If I could help someone avoid a similar situation, I would feel much better. When I submitted the report to the job site, I felt a bit anxious. Would they understand the situation? Would they take this seriously? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done the right thing. This feeling only grew stronger as I realized I wasn't alone in my unease. Everyone from my family to my friends, even people I had never met, all agreed that this was an unusual situation. The next day, I received an email from the recruitment site thanking me for sharing the information and notifying me that they would investigate the company further. The tension inside me eased a little. I didn't know what the results of their investigation would be, but at least I knew I had done what I could to protect myself and others. I couldn't help but wonder if this company was even real or just a scam. But what mattered most was that I had chosen safety and found a way to protect myself from a situation that could have gotten out of hand. After all, I learned that asking questions and not hesitating to express concern is incredibly important in any situation, especially when something feels off.